At the Teal Foundation, we work to inspire more young people to get into entrepreneurship and also people of all ages to think more broadly and harder about sort of big problems and what they can do to work on sort of these hard issues, from radical science to radical human rights. And we have projects across a number of areas, just to run through briefly so you have an idea of where we're coming from. So we work to champion organizations and individuals who expose human rights abuses and authoritarianism in all its guises, like the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Oslo Freedom Forum, the Human Rights Foundation, by supporting the exploration of new ideas and new spaces where people can be less reliant on government and freedom can flourish, like through the Seasteading Institute and the new Machine Intelligence Research Institute. And by supporting scholarship that seeks to understand and prevent the causes of violence through Imitatio, which extends and promulgates the work of the Stanford philosopher René Girard and his research into mimetic theory. And also by supporting the science and tech research and entrepreneurship needed to make the world, the future, a much better place than it is today. And we have about 3 projects that are most in this area that are most relevant to tonight's topic of conversation. One, we have a super early stage science company VC fund called Breakout Labs, where we fund about a dozen companies a year whose work is either too novel or risky for traditional sources of funding, like the National Institutes of Health, and on too long of a time horizon for sort of traditional VCs. We also, about the past year, have been running a semi-annual summit for young entrepreneurs where we bring together hundreds of people under 23 who are either interested in entrepreneurship and want to really work on their own self-directed work, or already running a business, not just in the tech industry, but sort of across all fields. And then, of course, we have the Teal Fellowship, where we give around 20 grants a year to young people to get them started on their ideas right now, rather than waiting until later. And those we give, it's $100,000 over 2 years, along with support from our network of mentors of scientists and innovators and researchers and investors and biz dev experts and thought leaders. We're in our we're going to be announcing our 3rd class later this spring. So we've been working with about 40 fellows now. I think one of whom actually was on this panel last year. They run across the whole gamut of fields within the broader tech space, from synthetic biology to AI to robotics to software, ed tech, energy, nuclear, sort of across a large swath of things, and also a large span of their personal and business development, ranging from early stage, just thinking about ideas and researching things or interning at companies, to actually raising seed rounds, to getting products on the market, selling services to customers. A few fellows have actually already sold companies and are moving on to new projects. And since it's a 2-year span for the fellowship, we really have the opportunity to see them grow and mature and really come into their own as young entrepreneurs. And so in a sense, it's less of like an incubator and more of a life accelerator. And it's, in another sense, serves as a lab for evaluating what sorts of qualities really you see in young entrepreneurs. And so we help nurture them and sort of try and foster these things. And some of them include a real focus on being mission-driven and being a self-starter, so that you have some larger idea of what you're working on, because being an entrepreneur it takes a tremendous amount of hard work, can be very lonely as you're initially developing your idea. Maybe you find a co-founder, but still may just be the two of you, and it may take a long time and a lot of iteration before you really are building things that you're then able to ship. But if you're able to hold fast to like a larger a larger view, something longer term, rather than just what's the crisis I'm dealing with this week or this month. We find that it helps sustain them over longer periods. Of course, you have to be gritty, determined, and resourceful, and able to hunt down things from a lead, however faint or tenuous. Really know how to extract all the value you can out of any given situation, and just be able to make things happen and have sort of the fortitude to push things through. We've also found that a lot of the young entrepreneurs we work with are extremely altruistic, and that actually their best resources are each other and sort of these larger communities that we're trying to help build. And so when we counsel either the fellows or the summiters, we, while of course advice we give depends on the particular situation, we often find that things sort of fall within a number of broad categories. To run through them quickly. It's important to set reasonable goals and launch quickly because talk is cheap and shipping matters most. But there's rarely a clear path, so you have to, when you're doing something new, you have to be able to challenge your assumptions and think clearly about what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, how does it fit within your larger vision, what else could you be doing, are you on the right path? And how do you evaluate that, which can be very difficult when you're doing something that maybe no one's done before. Life, and I think this is a lesson that people often learn in maybe their 20s or 30s, but when you're coming from sort of a younger space, you maybe have, you've had lots of sort of safety nets to catch you, whether your teachers or your parents or your school, but once you get out into life and you're working on your own, there's no one to cut you slack, and your company or vision may not necessarily succeed, but it's certainly not going to succeed without you being the one who takes responsibility for the work and the development and sort of every aspect of it. And then more pedestrian things that we also find that the younger people often struggle with, like finding housing, that's just become, over the last year especially in the Bay Area, just absolutely insane. Especially if you're 17, you're 18, even if you have one of our fellowships, you don't have the whole credit history that you may need, and we really love the trend for hacker houses and these group homes where people all interested in sort of the same approaches to building a cool future come together and live, but I think there's still a lot more development that would be great to go on there. And then need to be very careful in how you choose your co-founders and colleagues and employees. There's going back to that loneliness. It can be a temptation to just sort of latch on to the first people that get excited about your vision, but it's very important to think carefully about building a company culture, finding people who are really the right fit, not just for the work, but for you and your larger vision. And sort of the last point is to really embrace failure. And for some reason, our society really discourages failure, and I think a lot of it stems from when you're younger, like going through school. Failure is this black mark of shame. If you fail a test or you fail a class, maybe that wrecks your GPA and you can't get into the right school that's going to then get you the job you want. And so failure is basically just derailing your life, and you need to avoid it and figure out how to give people the answers they want so that you can, rather than necessarily what the right answers might be. And so we try to counsel people to not that failure is good and to be desired, but that you really want to push yourself, and if you're going to fail fast, really learn from your failure. And if you're not always sort of flirting with the possibility of failure, you're probably not taking large enough risks and really not challenging yourself as much as you really could be. So our narrow goal with the summit and the fellowship and all of our work with young entrepreneurs is to try and encourage and support more young people to take bigger risks and to tackle larger problems than they might have ever thought they could have. But then our broader goal with our work with young entrepreneurs and also across everything we do at the foundation is to try to inspire a whole generation of people to think really critically about life and rigorously about what you're doing, what you could do, how you, and the path that you could set out on, and to really dream big and tackle the sorts of problems and do the sorts of work that are going to help take our civilization to the next level, rather than just doing sort of things that other people might be doing. So the idea that young people can be successful entrepreneurs who build amazing things and really change the world is certainly not, it's not a new one. We've seen wonderful tech founders who created companies when they were in their early 20s. But I think there's still a level of social acceptance that is not quite as broad, especially outside of Silicon Valley. It's not as broad as I would certainly like to see. I think Paul Graham's certainly been writing about it for a number of years, that more young people should just launch startups. And he actually places the lower bound on sort of the age that he thinks people can successfully do this at around 16. And I certainly agree with him, but it's interesting. When we meet, the first time we met finalists for the fellowship 2 years ago, we brought them out to interview in San Francisco, and it was clear that for many of them, this was the first time they'd ever met other members of their tribe. People who think about the world the way that entrepreneurs do and are really excited about building companies and building products and changing people's lives. And even some of the parents of our fellows, even to this day, not most of them, but some of them, still, I think, are not sure about how respectable being an entrepreneur can be and how productive it can be. One of the fellows from our first class spent the first year and a half of his fellowship building an amazing company, and just recently co-founded Developer Auction. And he told us about how even to this day, in spite of all his amazing work, his parents still mail him MCAT test prep books, because he really is just going to go to med school, because being a doctor is far more respectable than being an entrepreneur ever could be. I certainly don't agree, and I think that events like tonight's and people like the panelists we have serve to help provide a greater level of social acceptance and almost validation for the idea that yes, if you're young and brilliant and driven, you can create things that are beautiful and make the world a better place. And this is something that that would be wonderful if we had more people involved. And so, speaking of wonderful, brilliant people who create and help create beautiful products that make the world a better place and improve people's lives, I would like to turn to the panel and have them introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about their work and also maybe touch on what larger issues drive them and really inspire them.
Cool. Well, I guess I'll go first. My name is Eric Mijakovsky. I work at a company called Pebble. We make smartwatches that talk to your smartphone. I'm 26 years old, as I guess that might be relevant for the conversation. I'm originally from Vancouver, but I went to school in Waterloo, Ontario. I went to the University of Waterloo, and I worked on my startup when I was actually in my final year of engineering there. I worked on it for about 2 years. The Pebble idea really came about because I wanted it. It was a product that I wanted, and I went out and started working on the tiny pieces, built my first prototype by soldering together cell phone parts. And the product that I ended up making is it's a watch that talks to your cell phone, and whenever you get a new notification, like an email, a text message, a call, the watch will vibrate and display the key portion of the message on the wrist. But as I've been working on it for about 5 years, I've realized that the watch is is more than just a notifier. It's more than just a piece of technology that's connected to your cell phone on your wrist. It's almost a new location for technology to be, and for apps, and for programs, and for ways that you can interact with technology. I studied systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo. And then after working on the company for about 2 years in Waterloo, Ontario, I was accepted into a program called Y Combinator, which is founded by Paul Graham. And I decided to come down to the Valley in 2011. Been working on Pebble, or it was previously called Impulse before that. Up until April, we were a pretty small company. We had 2 or 3 people working for us, with, of course, a couple interns along for the ride. And then in April 2012, we decided to launch our project on Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding website. And we kind of launched the product to the world. It took off. We got a lot of traction on Kickstarter. And since April, we've been working our nose to the grindstone to bring Pebble to life. And I'm excited to be here. It's really exciting. And I'm looking forward to chatting about different ways that young entrepreneurs face challenges, face problems, how we help each other, how I could help you, how you can help me. And I'm really open to answering any sort of question about the process. I'm excited to hear what we're going to talk about.
How much did you guys raise on Kickstarter?
We raised $10 million on Kickstarter.
It's incredible.
And Matt's one of our backers, as I'm sure there's quite a few people out here as well. And Cameron.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the backers.
Cameron?
Yeah, so I'm Cameron Robertson. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Lockatron. And we make a device which goes over your current door lock and lets you lock and unlock it using your phone. We started working on Lockatron also as I was finishing up school. My co-founder Paul has sort of this hardware background, and I had a background with software. With relation to sort of talking with younger entrepreneurs, I studied things completely different than what I work on a daily basis. I studied history and finance and econ, and I write code all day. So it's kind of like a funny trade-off there. Our story is a little bit similar to Eric's in that we started at CU, and we were working on this product, and we're getting into this type of thing, and we looked at Y Combinator, applied to it, came out to Silicon Valley in 2009. And what we saw was we were interested in this whole space of internet-connected devices, and that devices give us sort of a new opportunity to bring software into our lives. And so we were playing around with certain things. We played around with a smoke detector that sends you a text message when it goes off, and things of that nature, kind of this infrastructure stuff. And we saw the problem with that was we wanted to make something which was very high touch, and people interact with it all the time, and it's very people-centric. And so that's why we focus on doors, and we made Lockatron. And the goal being that we have to interact with these things all the time, and so we wanted our software to be present all of the time. So we had a first-generation product, and it was interesting, got a lot of press, sold a couple hundred of them, and there are a lot of problems with it. But from that, we decided, we understand what we need to perfect with this product. We understand what we need to make better, and we decided to go down the same route as Eric. Actually, we saw sort of Eric with Pebble, and we knew each other through YC, and we thought, gosh, this is a great idea. 2012 is sort of the year of Kickstarter bringing these products to life. So we were prepping all through the summer of 2012 to do a Kickstarter project, filming our video ourselves, doing all this stuff, and then we are ready to apply. We submit our application, and a day later, a blog post comes out and it says, Kickstarter is not a store. And I said, gosh, well, okay, there are these new guidelines they put in place. You can only sell one of a thing and so forth. And we thought, that's okay. We'll, even if we get rejected, we'll resubmit and we'll amend this and we'll fit to this new guideline. And so we get rejected. And I thought, maybe I'll try and just short circuit this. And I reached out to Eric, and we got in touch with one of the folks at Kickstarter directly. He said, no, you guys weren't caught up in this. You were a home improvement product, and we don't let those on Kickstarter. And we thought, well, okay. I mean, you have all these other things, and we can't really argue with you. It's your website. So we thought, well, what do we do from there? So we had a lot of momentum going into it. Again, 2-3 person company, and we said, to heck with it, we're going to just build this on our own website. And so within a week or so, we put together our own crowdfunding website on lockatron.com, put it together, had a big buy button, and we went to the press. We said, okay, time to launch this thing to the world. And no one wanted to talk to us. No one wanted the story. We talked to all these folks at Engadget and The Verge, and they're like, not even responding to our emails. So TechCrunch had launched us a year previously with our first gen product, and they agreed to do a story on us. And within the first day, we had been looking for $150,000 in orders to know that this is a reasonable product to make, to manufacture 1,000 of them. And we had over $500,000 in orders. So it was quite a ride, and I think we've stumbled onto something which seems to be something that people want. So.
But you ended with more than that. That was just the first
Yeah, that was the one day. So.
Yeah, we didn't end up with quite as much as Eric. We closed at $2.3 million, but still not bad for a month, and it's clearly enough to show that there's a market there. So.
And also, I think the interesting thing is not bad for giving away no equity this is all customer orders. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
it's also a similar story to you by launching software as a platform almost, because you ended up launching Self-Starter, and many other projects have used the same software.
Yeah, actually. So taking from sort of one of Matt's big things, open source, that's where we decided to open source the software we built. After a week, we said, this isn't core to us. We are making these devices that go on your doors. We are not trying to compete with Kickstarter. That's not our goal. So we open sourced it, called it Self-Starter, and it's like a super popular project on GitHub. Yeah.
Ernestine?
Hi, I'm Ernestine Fu, currently an early stage investor completing the Kauffman Fellows program at a venture capital firm called Alsop Partners. My first investment was in 2 young entrepreneurs from Stanford. I also have an interest in public service, so I'm co-authoring a book with a professor at Stanford, Thomas Ehrlich, titled What You Can Do for Your Country. And finally, a shout out to all the students in the room. Pulled an all-nighter yesterday studying for midterms because I'm also finishing my degree at Stanford. So.
Cool.
Matt?
My name is Matt Mullenweg. After the introductions, I am running low on wine. I'm sure you guys are as well, so we'll keep it short. Has anyone who here has used or currently uses WordPress? The audience. Okay, so good amount. How about who's heard of Automatic? Probably a much smaller number. So think of WordPress.com like the Swiffer, and Automatic like the Procter & Gamble. So automatic.com, AUTOMATTIC. Okay. Keep it short.
Great. So now we'll move through a few questions, and if you want to send to text questions in, there should be a number on your program, so feel free to do so. So one question I have that's sort of near and dear to my heart is wondering how school has helped or hindered your the work that you do now or expect to do. Why don't we?
Sure, I'll start it off. So I went to the University of Waterloo. I studied engineering. It was extremely core to what I do. Of the 11 people that work at our company, I think I know 8 of them, seven or 8, through my engineering career. They're friends of mine from engineering, and they're the people that I knew the best when I started working on this company. So, when you start a company, you have not much money, you have not much time, you have not much trust, you have not much support in the community. So your friends are usually, the people that do trust you, the people that do support you. And so I turned to them, and we worked together, from 5 years ago on, together to make this product. And I think being at the University of Waterloo, it's a very project-based curriculum where we went through 5 years of engineering, and every single term we would build something different. We would have 4 months. We would have usually a group of 4 or 5 people, and we'd have to invent something, design it, architect it, and actually build it within the span of 4 months. And I think that really gave me the chance to see what 4 people could do in the span of 4 months. And it turns out you can do a fair bit of damage, and we kind of kept that going. Instead of graduating and working at one of the companies that I did internships at, I just continued on doing a project. So it felt pretty natural to me as an extension of university.
I think in my case, I definitely didn't study what I worked on. School is really neat for me because starting a company in school, I think, is one of the greatest times to actually start a company and do a startup, because you don't realize how good it is until you leave. You sort of have all these needs and worries taken care of and out of the way, and the moment you come near the end of school, you start to have to interview at places and you get into jobs and stuff. A lot of that shifts, and so I think, you know, starting a business near the end of school was excellent. Of course, I met my co-founder Paul there, and he's, you know, he's like my partner, my, what is it, heterosexual life partner. So we've gone through all of this stuff together, and you know, it's so school definitely played a crucial role. At the end of the day, I purely enjoyed academics for the fun of it, and I think that was worthwhile. But I don't know if I would go back and personally do an engineering degree, just because that's not really what I was interested in. I would say it's a great time to explore interests and not necessarily worry about what you have to do next.
So for me, school was actually how I even got involved in entrepreneurship in the first place. So just the history between Stanford and Silicon Valley, and that Stanford, there was a dean, Frederick Terman, who actually helped shape Silicon Valley, and then you see companies such as Google, Genentech, Yahoo actually coming out of Stanford. So I met a venture capitalist at the current firm at Stanford, an event at Stanford, and then I came from Los Angeles, grew up there, and had no idea what entrepreneurship was, no idea what venture capital was. So I think school has actually been very helpful, I think, just because of Stanford and the role in shaping Silicon Valley to actually get involved in Silicon Valley in the first place. So.
But you're unique in that you're actually in school right now, like right this minute. You should be studying. So why stay in school? Like, he'll give you $100,000 to drop out.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I was almost about to turn 20 when the Thiel Fellowship actually was launched, and I didn't drop out of school. But I think it's also, if you see about kind of the networking opportunities, being able to actually meet a co-founder in school, having accelerated classes that are more focused on products to actually start your own company. And for me, it just seemed as if staying in school was, I wouldn't say maybe like an easy way out into, instead of getting out into the real world, but actually staying in touch with people. I think probably just Stanford specifically and its relationship with Silicon Valley, you see so many startups spinning out of Stanford that it just seemed natural to stay at Stanford. But if I went to, say, Harvard, Yale, or an East Coast school, that might have been different, I think.
So a follow-up for you, Ernestine. So we actually, so while most of the people who apply for fellowships are more in like the entrepreneurship space or the research space, we always do have a number that apply wanting to become venture capitalists. And so I was wondering, what advice would you give someone who's 15, 16, 17 and wants to become a VC? How should they think about it? What should they do? What's the path?
I think if you want to become a VC, you have to make sure you don't say that you want to be a VC, because no VC firm is going to hire you if you say you want to be a VC. I think a lot of times when they're hiring for VC firms, they obviously look for someone with entrepreneurial background, entrepreneurial experience. So I guess I was lucky in that I had no idea what venture capital was. I came from Los Angeles. It's all about Hollywood films, and I think in general, like all the young kind of VCs I've seen, the young associates, none of them wanted to become venture capitalists in the first place. So
how do
dragged into it.
How do they teach? Do they teach entrepreneurship in Stanford? Like, I've seen a lot of startups come out of Stanford, but in like when I was going through school, it was never really a curriculum course or anything like that. Is it moving towards a way where they're trying to teach entrepreneurship now? Like, is that even possible?
I think there are a lot of entrepreneurship courses at Stanford in which I think they don't really try to teach entrepreneurship, but more how to accelerate entrepreneurship. And in some ways, I actually am a bit critical about kind of incubator programs and programs that actually try to teach entrepreneurship, because it lowers the barrier to entry. Because inherently starting a company is supposed to be difficult. And if you're trying to accelerate the process or even teach the process, how is that, how can you become like a real entrepreneur if the barrier is lowered in some ways? But there are so many courses at Stanford that try to accelerate the entrepreneurial learning process.
What did you study, Matt?
I don't even remember. Political science.
So moderating comment forums? Or?
Political science is actually far more useful for running an open source project than computer science. I think it's one of those things where they say, youth is wasted on the young. I think that school is wasted on people currently in school. And I really miss it. That sort of luxury to be able to spend time with one of the great texts of sort of human history and like talk with people who are also studying the same thing and all that. Like if I would actually love to go back and not study anything related to business or computers. Because that's where real value and that's where real meaning comes from.
So related to finding value and meaning, so obviously like coding's fun, tinkering with things is fun, building new products is fun, really pushing forward your vision's fun. But on the flip side of that, running a business involves these pedestrian, messy things like supply chain management or HR, logistics, distribution, fundraising. How do you balance the fun aspects that I imagine really drew you in the first place with sort of the messy aspects that they're involved in keeping it going?
Out of anyone, Matt's probably had the greatest experience scaling these types of functions because we're all still pretty small at that.
What I would do is I would read as much as possible. It's just as many books on management, Peter Drucker, just whatever I could get my hands on. Because especially as a young entrepreneur, you're kind of scared at any moment. People will figure out you don't actually know what you're doing. So you're just trying to stay ahead of that curve. And there's some amazing books out there. Innovation Entrepreneurship by Peter Drucker is one I'd highly recommend. The Halo Effect by someone I can't remember the name of. Talent is Overrated, another one I can't remember the author. But the books really stood with me. And a lot of the ideas I learned from these were how we shaped the automatic culture. Because ultimately, I wanted to create a place, that I wanted to work 10, 20 years down the line, which meant it had to embrace open source. It had to have a style of work where we're a distributed company. So only about 20 of the 150 people in Automatic are in San Francisco. So really embracing the aspects of what I think companies are going to look like 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And so really books, I guess, is the answer.
Looking at the comment you made about being worried that people would blame it on things on your youth or not take you seriously because of your youth. Are there any advantages that you've seen to being younger and in this space?
I think that I don't really feel terrible about making mistakes. I feel like most of what I learn is from making mistakes, and the longer that my company is around, the less mistakes we make because we've kind of made them all. One of the really things that have stuck with me from Paul Graham, who's a great startup writer as well, is some of the tips to make a good company is make something people want, and then the second one is don't let your company die. And if you can do both of those things, you have a successful company almost by definition. And so I think over 5 years of working on this, it's definitely been like that. There's times when you're scraping close to the bottom, both in terms of ideas, manpower, money, thought, mind share. But as long as you keep iterating and you keep improving your ideas and keep learning really from your customers about what they want and what they want to use, you can definitely find success. And I think having that this is my first time working at a startup, my first startup, and really getting the benefit of the doubt is pretty useful.
I think with us, it's really interesting, kind of dovetailing with what Eric said. I don't feel like we're particularly young, and that's because in startup years we aren't. I mean, we've been, Eric said 5 years, 3.5 years. Like, in terms of living that long as a company, that's actually a pretty long time. The statistics are that, X large number of startups die every year in existence. And it's kind of true. If you don't have much going on, and you're not going for these big inflection points and these big risks where you can really build something, there's an increasing likelihood you're going to die. So I guess I don't feel like we're I don't feel like our own personal age particularly plays into it, but just how long we've been sticking to it helps, because we're getting less bad at it. So it's probably the best way for us to see it, yeah.
Yeah, you can't manage by aphorisms, but one of my favorite is Esther Dyson. She says, only make new mistakes. That's kind of what both of you guys said.
Yeah.
Ernestine, I was wondering, so there are some stereotypical things that people talk about, founders having like determination and drive, and they never let their company die, things like that. What sorts of qualities do you look for in founders, especially if they're sort of unusual or unexpected?
Mm-hmm. I think optimism is very important, just because within a startup there's so many ups and downs, and in some ways you have to be insanely optimistic to even start a company in the first place. But at the same time, also making sure you're starting a company that addresses a market need, because some people are so optimistic and so focused on their own product that they don't realize that maybe no one in the world actually wants to use it. So I think both a combination of optimism and both addressing a market need would be the two things that I look for. And I think both Pebble and Lockatron, and obviously WordPress does that. So.
And for Eric and Cameron, there's been growing attention on this idea of hardware startups and enthusiasm for it. At the same time, fundraising for hardware startups, it seems to be a lot harder than for software startups. And then Kickstarter changes their terms of service. What advice would you give for someone like you, but minus a few years? Like, how do you actually get money now to build a new hardware product?
Well, I think the first thing that you mentioned about hardware, I'm a big fan of hardware because it's something that people use on a daily basis. Like Cameron touched on this, when you use your lock or you use your watch or you use a computer or laptop, it's a physical object that's in your everyday life. And people will not really stand to use bad objects. If it's bad, if it doesn't work, if it feels wrong, they'll put it in a drawer and they won't use it anymore. And so one of the ways that you know that you're doing something that people want is if they continue to use your product. And when it's hardware, it's visible, it's out there in the open. And I'm a big fan of that. So I would encourage people who are interested in doing hardware startups to think about that. Think about how you can work on something that has an effect on someone's everyday life. And particularly what could improve your life, because that's how you normally start thinking about these problems. In terms of funding it, once you have the idea, I don't think hardware is particularly hard to fund. I think I built the first couple prototypes of our product just off of giant checks from pitch competitions or something like that. Hardware, especially if you hang out at the Hacker Dojo, or if you know people who are just hacking together gadgets, or if you go to Stanford and they probably have 3D printers, the hallways these days. I think it's fairly feasible for young people, especially for any people to get into manufacturing their own hardware. We built the first 600 or 700 watches in our garage. It's not as hard as I expected. It's very hard to get right, but it's not that hard to get started. And I think that's I think it's a good thing. Scaling it is definitely a little bit harder and needs money, but there are ways that you can elegantly find money or sort of work with people who have similar ideas and combine your resources.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Eric and I were just talking about this before we came up here. With hardware, it's one of those situations where frequently you have to go through one full iteration before you hit it right, and we both had that. We had our first version of Lockatron on the market in 2011. Publicly, we were selling them as beta units before that. Each one of them was hand-assembled. We had a lot of big components off the shelf, which made it very expensive, so the amount of margin we made was very slim, and we had to charge a really high price for it. So it was a really high price. It didn't work perfectly the way we wanted to. It demonstrated the core concept, and so the users who bought it were sort of fanatical about having this technology. But we learned a huge amount about sort of the basic logistics of dealing with this product, what customers wanted from the product, what they saw in it, and the same is true with Eric and Impulse and then Pebble. The same is true has been for the last 30, 35 years. I mean, that was the Apple I and the Apple II. The Apple I had a tremendous amount of problems with it, and you only got a case for it if you asked Steve Wozniak nicely. Otherwise, you just got the bare board, and then as much as the bite shop wanted them with cases, they didn't come with it. And so I think that's the thing with these hardware products, is that you can actually get pretty far and get a lot of data with a couple hundred units out there, and that doesn't require a lot of capital, but it lets you know I'm onto something, or maybe I should try something else. And if you're onto something, that Rev 2 should really perfect it. And so with us, the Rev 2 was, okay, price is way too high. We had our first price at $295. We cut it in half. For our self-starter, we did $149. The installation was tough. I would say 10 to 30% of our customers had a locksmith install it. And the funny thing is, a lock isn't really a difficult thing to change when you've done it once. But most people have never done it once before. And so they would hire these locksmiths, and the total cost of ownership went up. So we said, okay, installation has to be a lot easier. And then the third one was just all these general things where it was polish. We had to make it a lot better in terms of the software, in terms of what it could communicate to you, the data you get from the device, how you interacted with it. And the interaction is, that we're trying to perfect is you walk up to the door and it unlocks for you. You don't even have to pull your phone out of the pocket. So all those things we never would have learned had we not had this first physical thing. And I think that the challenge there is a lot of companies don't survive their first revision. They just don't. It's hard. It's hard to keep on believing in yourself when everything seems like it's sucking, and then you have this one little kernel of value, and you have to take that and extrapolate again. And so yeah, just try it once. Build prototypes. Get them out there.
I guess to touch on Eric's point, 3D printing is making manufacturing and hardware a lot easier. I think the government's actually looking very closely at 3D printing because someone actually was able to assemble an AK-47 through a 3D printer, everything except for the barrel. So the wonders of 3D printing.
Steve Jobs, I think it was famously said that customers don't know what they want. How do you balance user feedback and user demands with actually creating something that you can affordably manufacture and sell and stay alive to continue to do so?
Maybe the software side?
That software is easy.
Really? It's that easy?
We don't have to assemble it in my garage. I don't even have a garage. I think that you should be data informed and feedback informed and not driven. And that's a little bit controversial because sort of lean startup methodology and everything is very much about having the users drive the project. But exactly what you just said, that people using this software or using your product are only going to think of adjacent possibilities. So the thing right next to the thing that you're doing. And often what really moves the market is the 10x, the thing that obliviates the need for the widget in the first place. Locatron's actually a good, both of you guys are a good example of that. And so I think it's good to actually ignore user feedback for, I would say, the first couple of stages of the startup. Obviously, stay in business.
Did you guys have a public bug tracker in the beginning?
From the very beginning. I mean, WordPress was an open source project from the beginning.
But did you build features based on the order of votes and the number of votes and that kind of thing?
Never.
No.
No. The thing that I would recommend, which is sort of a version of that, is doing support. Is amazing. Everyone that joins Automatic, from engineers to the CFO we just hired, does 3 weeks in support. But the department's called Happiness Engineering. And everyone does it. And it's a great way to learn all of our systems and actually learn WordPress. But B, I think it keeps you close to the customer. And that I would always advocate for, because when you see big companies that sort of start building things that no one cares about, often it's because the person building it has a project manager and then a manager of that and like a group manager. There's like 10 levels between the engineer and the person actually using the software. And at each one, it's like a game of telephone. Like we could go down the line, right? Do you remember playing that? Like, do kids still play that? Is that like cursive? It's all gone?
Broken connection?
Yeah.
Game of Snapchat.
Highly latent connection.
Broken Snapchat.
that is so important. And some of my favorite days of the very early days of Automattic, support at WordPress was just an alias to everyone at Automattic. And just every single person got the email, and whoever would reply first would that was our ticket system. And so the reason everyone goes to support now, and in fact teams rotate back through it, is trying to recreate some of those early days where each of us would feel the pain of our users in our inbox. Like you could tell by the unread messages when you wake up in the morning how much your product sucks that day. And you make it better, you see it go down. You make it worse, you see it go up. That feedback loop is amazing.
I think it's a very visceral feedback loop like that. It's not like, you definitely get sort of this baseline of commentary from your users of like, I want X, Y, Z feature, I want this feature, I want this feature. And at the end of the day, it's not about those features that you're building the product around. It is about those moments where you get 100 emails and people are saying, this isn't working, this is horrible. Like, it's like you killed my pet dog. Like, it's all of these things which, that is there.
Hopefully
very
Lockatron
clearly.
is not that.
Well, but that's the thing is with Lockatron, we see a lot of these firsthand. It's an internet connected door lock. And so you can only imagine the stuff that it goes offline. Your phone battery dies. Like there are a number of scenarios there, and we work as hard as we can to alleviate those. But at the end of the day, you're going to have people who call you and they're standing outside their door and they can't get in, and that is the truth of it. And we keep on working and ways to make that better and better and better, and that is the core of our product. So I'd much rather fix that problem than someone saying, gosh, I wish that I could change the color of the app to green or something. Say, well, maybe we'll shelve that for a while and keep on making this core experience better and better and better.
I love green.
Sorry, Matt, it's blue.
So there's a bit of a personal question, so I'll just throw it out, and anyone who wants to address it can. What's the biggest mistake that you've made, and how did you, how did you handle it going forward? Or a mistake?
Well, I made a mistake in 2011. We raised a very, very small angel round after we completed Y Combinator, and I made the mistake of buying too much inventory. I over-manufactured the first product that I made by a 2x factor over what we were eventually able to sell of that first generation product. And that was a lesson that stood by me for quite a long time, and it's quite a powerful lesson to see something that you work on, you manufacture it, and then you're just not able to sell as many as you expected. And with hardware, you can physically see your failure to sell. And we for a while we actually kept boxes of unsold impulse watches around, and it served as furniture for a while, which was actually pretty useful, but very, very, very expensive furniture. And I think it was more of a, we keep it around now as a lesson to, make sure you understand what the next milestone, what the next stage of the project that you're trying to get is. And as you work towards that, make sure that all the variables are looking like they're going to work out. So up until that point that we weren't able to sell our inventory, there were some telltale signs, like it was taking us too long to move from the time that we started manufacturing to the time that it was coming off the line. Technologies were changing, and we didn't really engage our customer base during that period of time that we were doing this first manufacturing run. And so those are all corollary lessons to the idea that we overbuilt and overinvested in inventory. It definitely nearly killed the company. I'm really glad that it didn't, but that's a lesson that has stuck with me.
Ours was similar. At the time when we had maybe 200 grand in the bank, I spent half of it, like 100 grand, on Dell servers. The Dell part isn't the punchline. It was like 8 servers, and we outgrew it in months, and so that was a problem. And
You didn't use Heroku? No.
It didn't exist. I feel like the old man here. We walked uphill to get to our servers. Number 2 was not investing in Lockatron when we hung out in Crossroads. Number 2 mistake.
How did you get over the overbuilding or overbuying? Like, how did you scale yourself out of that?
It ended up being a blessing in disguise. like you got great furniture out of it. Because we didn't really have enough money to buy another one of the servers in a different data center. From a very early time, so we had these ones we were stuck with, and the provider was like, you can't have any more, we're not going to sell you any. And so we had to put a couple more servers just on my credit card in a different data center. So we were forced to create cross-data center replication, essentially, of WordPress.com from like a ridiculously early point when we had like 12 servers total, which is not very many. But that cross-data center functionality ends up being hard to do and very, very useful in terms of now we run live out of 3 data centers, which except for, and we've done that for 5 or 6 years, which except for very large-scale sites, almost no one does. And so when what we call VIPs, like large media clients, like say a CNN, would come to us and say, hey, is this going to go down? We're like, well, a meteor can hit San Antonio. We'll be OK.
You have a data center in northern Russia?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Yeah, it's funny with us. Ours was a fundamental business failure, and this was early on, actually before Lockatron, and it kind of led us in that direction. When we came out to YC, it's even to this day difficult for me to pitch what we were working on, and that should have been a telltale sign that we weren't working on the right thing.
What were you going to make?
We were making physical pizza buttons where you press the button and a pizza shows up, and that's
a great idea.
That's the simplest way to explain it. Yeah,
there's a
Taco-Copter. Yeah.
The Taco-Copter.
So you know that would get funded today.
The front end of that is interesting.
You're going to pivot back to that.
Yeah, one of these days. The back end was talking to like pizza shops and trying to convince them that we could send them automated phone calls that ordering a pizza. And so what we would do is we would actually we would have like 2 of the guys stay back at the house and put in an order through our system. And then 2 of us would drive up and sit outside the pizza shop and watch them take this phone call. And we would just sit there and stare. Or we'd go and sit like inside the pizza shop and just awkwardly, and they'd be like, can we help you? We'd be like, no. And then all of a sudden this ghostly call comes through and it's this robotic voice, I'll have 1 cheese pizza with some. And the problem was a lot of these folks, it started to speed up and they lost track of it, and it's like the credit card number is 12735, expiring security code 725, and it's just going on and on. It had all these fundamental problems of, it was a local sales problem and we weren't salesmen, we were trying to build technology. It was a marketplace problem because the broader idea was we connect to all these local businesses and then developers can build the pizza buttons. And then the third one was just, our hearts weren't in it after a lot of this stuff. We said
after how many pizzas you ate?
We had to get all this pricing data from the web, and getting pricing data from small businesses is notoriously bad. And I think one of our friends' companies in YC said, yeah, go order a pizza through the sample site, and they're like, great, we just put it in, it says $40, and then they ended up paying something like $80 for it. So we still owe them another $40 for that pizza. But yeah, so that at the end of that, it was actually a week before demo day in YC when we decided to switch to hardware, and
as you do.
Yeah, exactly. It was a week before. We go to Paul Graham, and luckily he wasn't all that shocked, and he said, "Well, just pick a different idea, figure out something you actually want to do," and it was a massive relief. And at the end of YC, there was this expectation as a company that we were going to die, which I think was a completely rational expectation. I mean, we had nothing going on for us. We had no money. This is before sort of Start Fund started putting money into YC. So we'd burned through most of the 20K, and we thought, well, let's keep doing this. Let's keep it up and see what we can do. And so that was a huge failure. We could have given up, and I think it would have been okay had we given up, but I'm glad we didn't. And surviving through those failures, it definitely makes you stronger. So.
Gosh, I think I make way too many mistakes, but I think probably in general signing up for too many things, so taking on more projects than I can handle, which I think is a problem that most startups also faced. You try to launch so many products and then all of them are mediocre, so. I've since learned because one of my professors gave me a book. I think it was titled The Art of Saying No. So been learning.
That's a good one.
And so for some questions from the audience. Hi, when will you know that you're ready to become an entrepreneur? Is it just enough if you have an idea with you?
I had a buddy, and he kept wondering whether he should drop out of school, which I did, to start a company. And I kept telling him no. The reason being that I knew that when he stopped listening to me, he was ready to be an entrepreneur. That was the moment when he couldn't not listen to the people telling him, because everyone tells you to stay in school. Everyone tells you to do sort of the safe path. And so the point when you just sort of disregard all that is you're either crazy or entrepreneur, and they're very close.
Cameron, what's the difference between Lockatron and Unikey from Shark Tank?
Ah, yes, Unikey from Shark Tank. There's a lot of differences. So Lockatron goes over your existing door lock. It's not a replacement. That's kind of one of the big things we focused on. And on the software side, we're very much focused on this ability to kind of share identity and share access to it. And so I believe in the one snippet we've seen about Unikey on Shark Tank, he said that would be possible, but we haven't seen anything else about that yet. So easy to go over your door, and the software side of things is really where we.
And what about the fact that you made a whole first version that people have been critiquing and using on a daily basis?
That it exists.
Yeah, we have existing models. We actually demoed one at CES this year. There's a TechCrunch video of it, and you can see it kind of doing its thing. One of our first pre-production models. So it does exist in person. Yeah.
So I, not me, the person in the audience, have an idea and am working on a prototype. Is it necessary to patent it before I start going to VCs for funding?
No.
I'm
not a
patents
lawyer.
take years. I mean,
Well, patents are expensive. So I would say this about IP stuff. If you ever feel like you want to file a patent, file a provisional. It's cheap. You can do it on your own. It'll take you a weekend or two to do it, but that's about it. You shouldn't worry about it. And even if once you file it and you talk to VC, at the end of the day, it's all about you. It's not about the idea. I think that's what we found is.
And moving quickly.
Yeah,
The quicker you can move, the less likely that you're going to worry about what you've been working on, whether it's completely protected. I think I haven't met too many people that on a slightly similar note. I haven't met too many people that run stealth startups. I don't know. Have you ever run into people who run stealth startups, Justine?
I mean,
they're hidden.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I don't even know, I can't even think of, I know a lot of people that are, I've been looking for them, but I don't know. I know a lot of people that are working in startups, but it's very rare to run into someone who's working in a stealth startup. And I think that that's very telling. I think that, one of the main jobs that you have when you're doing a startup is talking about it, seeing what people think, playing your idea, bouncing it off people. And I think that if you're playing coy with your idea and sort of really sort of keeping that idea close to the vest, it's very hard for people to help you. And one thing that I found here in the Valley is that people are very, very willing to help. So I would take any chance I had at getting feedback.
But also, I mean, if the idea is really revolutionary, you have to jam it down people's throats.
Yeah, you'll know that it's revolutionary.
No one's going to believe in it, and so there's almost no risk to telling an idea to someone.
NDAs are also ridiculous because a lot of people can have the same idea. They can go knocking on a VC store with the same idea, but it's really about the person and can they actually execute it. So.
There's also the idea that patent holders only go after successful companies. So if you're in that situation, that's
not always
you're on
true.
the right track.
I mean, there's some weird stuff with patent trolls trolling companies that are posting apps on the App Store that use some technology. So I mean, there's ways to get screwed, and I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But yeah, I wouldn't think that a patent would help you defend against that kind of a situation.
Well, a corollary to that is that, especially with software patents, they're essentially things that cover anything you might do in the first place.
Patents are total BS. There's a new thing that the EFF has been pushing. I forget the name of it, and I feel bad for that, but it's essentially like an open source for patents, where basically you say, I'm going to patent this, but I promise never to use it except defensively. And so it essentially takes the idea and protects it, but without, keeping in a portfolio that could be used aggressively or things like that. And so I would highly encourage anyone who's thinking about doing patents to seek out this thing, because software patents are just like a blight upon humanity. And they hinder innovation, which is the opposite of what they were trying to do, what they're designed to do.
So if you're young and you have a technology idea and you think that there's a market for it, what's the very first step, other than getting a patent?
Naturally. Building it?
Yeah, do it.
Building it, yeah, I think that's a pretty good step. Build the minimum viable product. Build the least amount of product that you could show to someone and that they would use, as the product. If you can build that, you can get feedback. You can even try selling it. It's a pretty radical concept, but people will buy pretty much whatever you make. And I mean that in the best way. I mean that what you're building, if it has value in their life, they'll pay money for it, and you can use that to help fund your work.
I think also looking for mentors. I'm sure none of us would have been where we are today without mentors and getting feedback.
Yeah, after the whole pizza button fiasco,
It sounds amazing.
we spent a good 3-4 months. We wrote so much code that at the end of the day amounted to nothing. We tens of thousands of lines of code, and we threw it all out. And after that, we became pretty allergic to spending more than a short amount of time on an idea. So we went through a couple of things and hacked them together pretty quickly. The smoke detector, the original Lockatron. We did some other stuff, and each one we spent no more than a week or two. Just make it super simple. Just hack as much together as possible. Just kind of get out the Scotch tape and stick it all together and show it to someone.
How did you go from humanities to tech? Did you teach yourself to code, or were you doing that all along?
Yes, but that's not completely fair. I had started doing web stuff when I was a kid in middle school, so I had a background. I also took a part and rebuilt computers, so I was very much into tech as a kid, and then actually when I got to college, people deterred me from going into our CS program there, which at the end of the day, I'm fine with that, but then I had to come back to it around YC, and I did have to sort of teach myself how to code. And having a very specific reason to teach yourself how to code is a phenomenal way to learn what you need. If you have this concrete, I either get to realize my idea or I don't, that's the best way to learn how to code. So. Yeah.
Now, have any of you all freaked out when you see things that are similar to whatever you're working on and appear on blogs or in the tech press?
There have been a few blogging platforms, I think, maybe.
A few, yeah.
A few. What's your opinion on?
Ultimately, have I ever freaked out? Yes. Does it ultimately matter? No. It's far more important to listen to your own users and to iterate on your own vision of what's coming than it is to respond to competition. Particularly because often the amount of press something receives is not correlated with its usage. And so you can sort of chase a lot of red herrings in terms of something that's getting like fantastic TechCrunch coverage, but actually doesn't have anyone using, has 10,000 active daily users or something. And so you just have to, I think, you follow your own, what's it called, true north? You have to have an idea and a vision, an idea for how you want to change the world, how you want to make your own dent in the universe. And just do that.
I think it's far more likely that you're going to die because people don't want your product or because you build a bad product than because competition will take you out. So that's my
It's kind of a sign of success. Like when you start getting the knockoffs, that means you've made it. Number 2 is when you start getting spam. That means you've made it.
When you start being spammed?
Oh yeah, more for web services. I don't know if you guys get spam.
Yeah, no, like when people are making comment bots that specifically spam WordPress sites, then you've made it, yeah.
Early days of WordPress, I thought we were like comment spam proof. It turns out we just weren't big enough for any of them to care.
That's awesome. That's an indicator of success.
So what motivated the change from Impulse to Pebble, and why Pebble?
Impulse was our first watch. It was a watch that worked with a phone called BlackBerry. It was these phones that they had keyboards on the bottom. They were very popular right around the time that I was starting to work on watches, so 2008.
And you're Canadian.
And I was from Waterloo, which is the home of research in motion.
Yep.
So the first product that I made worked with BlackBerry. It worked well with BlackBerry, but when I came down to the Valley in 2011, we learned about this iPhone, Android, and there are these other phones out there. And I had to answer a lot of questions of why our product didn't work with iPhone. And it was actually a technical limitation. Up until iOS 5, apps were not able to run in the background if they were talking to a hardware device. And then in iOS 5, there was actually a technological change, and we were finally able to kind of make Impulse work with, or watches work with iPhone. We hacked together a prototype in like a couple weeks after WWDC in 2011. We got it working, and then we were like, whoa, I think we could actually change this idea fundamentally from this watch the first version of the watch to the second version. It was a dramatic shift. We didn't just iterate on the hardware design. We, wiped everything away and started at the core, keeping in mind all of the things that we learned over 3 years of working on the product. I think that was a really hard decision because, we had a lot invested in the software platform and the hardware, but it was the right thing to do, mainly because we had just so much feedback and we'd learned so much from our users.
And how did you choose a mass production partner, and what were the challenges in scaling that up?
Oh, that was fun. After Kickstarter happened, we shifted from our first plan, which was to manufacture Pebble locally in San Jose. We were originally planning to manufacture about 1,000 Pebbles. But after Kickstarter happened, we knew we had to go overseas because that's kind of where consumer electronics are made. The expertise and the skill set and the supply chain are all overseas. So we went to southern China. We interviewed and visited and worked with 7 different factories. We ended up choosing one that was a fairly well-known CM and a contract manufacturer. And it's been quite a 10-month ride since then, or 8-9 months. It's been a lot of learning, trial by fire, and really just making mistakes. It's very much like doing a startup because you are working with factors that you don't really control, like your factory, and making small mistakes, seeing what the effect is, changing those, changing the parameters, and working with people, really.
As a cautionary tale, you guys are done well. I was an investor in WakeMate, which was another Y Combinator company. They made a bracelet that you wear when you sleep, and it tracks when you sleep. But they went a little cheaper on the USB charger, and it sends uneven voltage that caused the lithium-ion battery in the WakeMate to catch fire, which for something you keep by your bed is a little scary. And ultimately, the company's now out of business. I think that was a big part of it. People got really. I think in reality, they only have a record of it happening one time, but that one guy took a video and posted it. And it freaked everyone out,
Yeah, hardware is hard. There's a lot of factors that are beyond your control. But I think it's not. It's not just startups. My friend's Galaxy Nexus just caught on fire today. So,
really,
yeah,
that's a little scary.
So it was smoking. I think quality is really important, especially on a hardware product. And keeping a really, that's one of the things that we've done. We've flown our whole, you were talking about support and talking about how everyone played a role in kind of that support process. I think we've had a similar way with with working with our factory. The 3 people that were in charge, that were pretty much at the company before we went on Kickstarter, have all traveled to China 6 or 7 times over the last couple of months. And, we've had a person in the factory basically 24/7 because there are just so many things going on that we needed to really have a ground level idea of what's happening.
Ernestine, a question for you, though, if anyone else wants to address it as well. How does an entrepreneur under 20 with a product, some revenues, and marquee customers overcome the age and experience barrier when approaching investors?
I think just don't mention your age because I think, but at the same time, I think you'll also find that a lot of investors in Silicon Valley are very open to listening to younger entrepreneurs and actually mentoring and helping out younger entrepreneurs. So I don't think age is necessarily a huge limitation. I think for me, when I started working in VC at 19, I just asked a bunch of questions and people were just open to responding because I wasn't 50 years old and I didn't know everything, and I was open to just getting feedback. So I think just being open to getting feedback and seeking out those mentors, asking for advice. So, yeah.
And regarding relationship with mentors, are you mentoring anyone yet, or what kinds of experiences have you had?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm both at the side of helping out younger entrepreneurs, especially fellow students at Stanford, but I think it's not just a mentor-mentee relationship. I learn a lot from them as well, so yeah.
Matt?
When WordPress started, I was 19, but I found it was actually a really great filter. So if someone doesn't take you seriously, even if your idea is good when you're young, they're probably making all sorts of other nonsensical filters, and so you probably don't want to work with them. So I didn't see it as a bad thing at all. I got most frustrated in like Best Buy, like when I was trying to buy a camera and now the associates would pay attention to me. Like those sorts of things were far more frustrating than when I actually got to San Francisco, and I was able to raise like $1 million before I was old enough to drink. And that was pretty cool.
Go to the mixers and you're not 21 yet.
You go to mixers, you're not 21. I actually lost one of the checks. That was a bummer. So one of our investors wrote a physical check for, I think, $400,000. The most money I've ever seen in my entire life. I lost it. And so at what point, I mean, what do you do at this point? Do you say, hey, sorry for writing me a $400,000 check. I misplaced it between my Legos and my, I mean,
That's a good one.
I actually didn't say anything, but I found it about 6 or 7 months later. Luckily, I mean, the other investors wired the money, so we had some money in the bank.
He never asked why you hadn't cashed the check?
No. But I don't know. I eventually found it, again, absent-minded. Like I was flying back to Houston for Thanksgiving, and I was opening a book that I hadn't read in a while, and I'd used it as a bookmark. World's most expensive bookmark, right? And it like fell into my lap on the plane, and I like yelped. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so like first thing I did when I landed was like go straight to the bank to deposit it. I told the investor later, though.
Yeah. Well, I think he knew, yeah, or she.
So a question for all of you. Can you comment on finding co-founders, and how do you know when you've found the right person or people?
I didn't have a co-founder per se. I had many people who helped out on the project, some people part-time, some people contract workers, consultants. I didn't have anyone who was in there, right from the get-go. And I sometimes feel like, I know that the project would have been a lot different if someone had been there alongside. I don't know exactly what it would have looked like. It probably would have been much more successful. But I just never met the right person to work on the project side by side. Not necessarily because I wasn't necessarily going out and trying to find a co-founder. I never sort of like thought of it as a downside or negative side, really. But I think I look at people who have like a close partnership, and I see a lot of value, and I see a really good team. So, if I was starting another company, I think I definitely would, work with someone I know, maybe more so than I have in the past. Yeah,
in our case, it's with Paul and I. It's a very close partnership. We make all the main decisions about the company together, and yet at the same time we can both take completely different functions of the company. And that type of partnership, it takes time, it grows, but as far as like, you just meet someone and being able to see if it's gonna click from day one, it's impossible to say. I think a lot of that comes with working alongside someone and persevering together with them over time. stick with it, and you know, we we still we live together. We've worked together for the past close to 4 years, and it's really phenomenal when you can trust someone so implicitly that it goes beyond loyalty. It's just when it clicks, and we've. You know, I've seen situations and seen other ones where you have problems with two co-founders and it doesn't work out. So it's very hard to sort of like meet someone and form a company a month later. But truth be told, that's what we did early on. So.
I think in addition to that trust factor, finding someone who you think's way smarter than you are. So the very first investment I made were 2 Stanford PhD students out of InfoLabs, which is a selective program within the CS department that Larry and Sergey actually founded Google out of, and both of the co-founders thought the other person was way smarter than themselves.
I was the only founder of Automatic, but I was very fortunate to meet Tony Schneider, who is kind of my business soulmate. And we've had a relationship much like you described. We don't live together. He has a family of like 3 kids and stuff, but is that one thing? It's just that just like a marriage might be unconditional love, it's like unconditional trust. Like you know that this person's always gonna look out for the best thing, and vice versa. And I mean, startups are really hard. And there's, for all the great things we've talked about, there's also a lot of low points. And there's a point when your first prototype only sells 300 copies, or like, there's all these things that are really, really tough that don't get written about as much and don't get talked about on panels as much. But those low points are where that other person who believes in the same thing you believe is the most valuable thing in the world, more valuable than any investor, more valuable than anything else.
You can find that in friends. You can find that in your family as well. But I guess there's definitely that connection to someone who's working on the exact same thing as you. It seems very powerful.
So 10 years from now, how is technology going to have changed the world? What's your vision for the future?
I think right now there's so much data out there. So just 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't instantly Google something and find information pretty much at your fingertips. I think in the future, it's about how we organize that data and how we actually understand it. For example, JetLores was my first investment, and they're focused on actually analyzing tweets and Facebook posts and how do you actually make meaning out of them. So I think right now there's just so much data out there, and being able to actually understand it is the next big thing.
I think it's very, very difficult to look that far in the future. I think we try and grasp and be really good at seeing what is 6 months ahead or 1 year ahead or 2 years ahead. 10 years is a huge amount of time, an eon, when it comes to these sorts of businesses. Because you think 10 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, Flickr, iPhone didn't exist, like Google did exist. They're one of the few. But like a lot of this stuff, it's really hard to say. And I think we're intimately in this space. We understand that what we're doing is we're taking this software and we're wrapping it in this hardware component, because software has saturated us through our computers, it's saturated us in our pockets, and now on our wrists, and it's going to come into our infrastructure. So what we're really doing is taking this software and putting it into a lot of different places. And we're going to seamlessly interact with it. It's going to be ubiquitous, but it's not going to be this sort of Jetsons type scenario where you're pressing buttons, having things done for you. It will be natural for you to interact with it everywhere. And I think that's how I see it, is that all of these things, whether it's Locatron or Pebble, they will have to be natural extensions of what we're doing now. Otherwise, the mass market won't adopt them. The mass market isn't interested in gizmos and gadgets. They're interested in utilities and things that make their lives 10, 100x better.
I super duper agree with what Cam just said, and that's the reason why I think open source is so important, because a bigger and bigger portion of our lives are going to be essentially run by software. That's also why coding is so important. Like scripting is new literacy. Program or be programmed, as Doug Rushkoff says. But I think that the ability to peek under the hood of these things that you're using, of the software that's influencing your life. I mean, who hasn't looked at their phone once during this panel? One hand, two hands, okay. Okay, a couple. Let's call it 5, 10. Still, right? We're trained. We have this sort of Pavlovian response to a buzz in our pockets. And we have this variable positive reinforcement of, it could be an email, it's probably spam or some junk, right? But it could be an email from like someone really exciting. Or it could be a comment, or it could be like a Foursquare comment. One of these things that's really exciting. And so we're trained to look at it. We're more trained than we're training our phones right now. And our phones largely are closed ecosystems. The web is mostly an open ecosystem, but holding on by its fingernails, I think, against closed systems. And we got to fight for it, because otherwise we will be under sort of technologically enslaved by proprietary systems. And that sounds drastic, but I think it's actually true. If you think 10, 20, 30 years down the line, to the singularity, or one of the Peter Thiel things. Open source is probably the most important thing. It's as important as our Bill of Rights is to us today.
Noting that that VLab is sponsored by the Stanford School of Business, what should young entrepreneurs study? Should they go to business school? Ernestine, what are you studying?
I think business school in some ways actually puts people into a box on how to think rather than encouraging innovation and creativity. So I guess just study what you're passionate about, and I think you can be studying mechanical engineering, building software, building hardware. You can do computer science, building software. I think political science, just pretty much whatever you're passionate about, and maybe not business, because I think it does put people into a box in some ways. So.
I would say philosophy of language, which Stanford and Berkeley actually have amazing programs for. Are you allowed to say Berkeley here?
No.
One time, okay, once. And the classics.
Yes.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree on the classics. I wish I'd taken more classics courses. I absolutely loved my history courses, my econ. I think the finance stuff was interesting, and it was a wonderful background, and it put me, a step ahead of where I would have been in understanding the business and how to deal with things. But any reasonably hardworking person can pick that up very quickly. So when I think back of my fondest memories, it is about sort of history and intellectual history and all those sorts of things. So, I would say take the time to enjoy yourself in school above all.
I guess, yeah, I think I agree definitely on the reading thing. I didn't read too much in engineering. Engineering was more about, building and trying things and working on the mechanics and the electronics. I think I read a lot of science fiction, and that had a broad effect on me. Growing up and reading Asimov and reading Orson Scott Card and all these kind of like futuristic novels. That's probably had a larger effect on some of the things that I'm working on than a lot of my formal education, at least on the idea of ideation and creating things. I think talking about it, I had some good friends, and we would talk about books and things that we've read. I think that I should have probably done that more in university, expanded my horizon to talk to more people who are studying different things and investigating different problems and reading different books, really. I think that would have done nothing but good. But at the same time, I think in an education, being able to try things and experiment and really just practice was really important for me. And I think one of the reasons why I continue to sort of work, at our company, we try small things, we try them, we see how they work, we experiment, we have rapid iteration cycles, and that's all kind of driven from like a short-term coursework type plan.
And for our closing question, Matt, what are you reading right now? I'm reading a book called Anti-Fragility by Nassim Taleb. Has anyone read this? Yeah, is it good? I'm like halfway through. It's a little tough. But I don't think you should recommend a book before you're done. But so far, like at least the first half, I would highly recommend. And Nassim Taleb is probably one of the more influential writers I've read over the past 5 or 10 years in terms of The Black Swan, Random Walk, just particularly for startups. I think it's a really, really great work.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's give the panelists a hand.